In this video, we'll look at actually lighting our zombie toys scene, adding additional lights for fill and to really get the mood of nighttime going. Right now, we have our scene lit by our wraparound sky and our directional light that's got a cookie on it, so it looks like moonlight is shining through a window. The first thing I'll do is to lower the intensity of that sky and then start to add in some point lights for fill. I've gone into the VFX folder in my assets, and I'll go into my skyboxes folder. In there we've got two things: the evening reflection, which is a cube map that defines a reflection, and a nightmares procedural skybox, our purple skybox. I'll take this and drag it in. You may have already done this previously, but as a refresh, you can take any skybox and drag it into a blank area of the scene to change the sky in that scene to the new sky. In this sky then, we've got a sun size, atmosphere thickness, sky tint, and ground. And right now our sky tint is set to a deep purple. I'll click on that sky tint color and bring it a little bit more towards blue. Just a touch here on the color slider. This definitely darkens the scene. We haven't set up any light baking yet, but we'll do that in the next chapter. For now, we've established a greater darkness in the scene and really made that moonlight show. Next, I'll take the directional light and lower its intensity a touch, bring the intensity down to 0.8. I'm also going to click on the color of this light and add a little bit of yellow. Typically in lighting, we want to work in complementary colors, where if we see a yellow main light or key light, we'll see some blue and purple in the shadows. The actual color is really subject to artistic interpretation. That is, we can make our shadows a true complementary color, yellow and purple for example, or bias the light towards blue to make it seem a little bit colder. I'll put the hue around 30 and bring up saturation to roughly 18 or 20, adding a little bit of a warm orange actually into this light. Now with these in, I can look at some fill lights in the scene. There are many areas, such as on the dollhouse and drawers here, that are in the dark and really lacking luster. We really need additional lights to make our materials shine nicely. Now let's get some point lights in. From the top menu, choose Game Object and Light, and then Point Light. Alternately, you can right-click in the hierarchy and choose Light and Point Light. This creates a point light game object in the scene. I'm going to use 4 point lights in the room and expand their ranges out to cover most of the room with some slight overlap, giving me a gentle varied light through this room. I'll press W for Move and switch over to the global axes by clicking on the global button. Now I'll pull this light over on the XZ plane into the corner of the room and expand out the range, either by dragging on the range slider or grabbing any of the nodes on the range sphere and pulling them out. We can see this light gently lighting up that corner. I'm going to put the color of this light roughly into that same blue range that's in the rest of the room. As you can see, I'm working in hue, saturation, and value here. If you'd like to work in red, green, and blue colors, you can click on the sliders icon on the middle right of the color picker. Personally, I prefer hue, saturation, and value, where I can see what color it is and how much color there is first. Then I'll click on the eyedropper and sample straight from the scene a deep blue. I'll add a little bit more color in and bring up the value, but pull down the saturation. So instead of a full blue light, we get a soft blue-purple in the scene. We'll bring up the intensity just a bit, roughly into 2, 2.2, somewhere in that range. Bear in mind that these lights will need to be tuned once we get into baking, and so we want to get an approximate value going, but keeping in mind we're going to change it a bit. I'll pull this light up out of the floor, so it's just roughly even with the middle of that dollhouse, or the roof. This is adding a little extra color here on the wall, a little variation across the surfaces. Now I'll duplicate this light, pressing Command D and pulling the next one over by the chest of drawers. I'll hold Alt and click the left mouse button to orbit around and duplicate twice more. The next light will go over somewhere by the cricket bat. And finally, one more time by the stool. Again, pressing Command D and pulling this light over on the XZ plane. This definitely brightens up the top of the stool, but it adds some nice relief to that geometry, so it doesn't appear completely flat and lacking in shine. To verify the position of your lights, go into a top view, click on the y-axis, and if you'd like, changing over to an orthogonal view instead of a perspective. I'll select all of my lights here in the hierarchy and look at their position and also the overlap of their different ranges. It's good, although this one in the bottom needs a little bit of adjustment. It's point light number 3, and I'll pull it down on the other side of the stool. Holding Alt or Option and clicking in the mouse wheel, I've panned down and I can look at the light position in the room. We've got the lights gently brushing the walls, adding a little bit of variance across the wall surfaces, and gently illuminating slightly differently all the different objects in here. These lights also have no shadows, as they don't need them. Our primary shadow casting source is that directional light. So these are really here for fill and accent, rather than direct shadow casting and illumination. What we'll see often is that lights like this exist to change the mood in the room, not through a giant contribution like our directional light, but to gently soften and vary surfaces. What we expect in lighting is to see rhythm, that the lighting rises and falls as light decays naturally over distance. The scene is fairly lit. What we're ready to do here is to possibly add some variation in color or adjust the intensity and values of the lights once we get our baking going. But we've established a main mood and given all the surfaces with their different specular components a chance to really shine in varied lighting.